are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Stan Barg, who is a lawyer with Kosciuszko, Harris & Duncan. He sits in New York. He specializes in tax law, estate planning, and he focuses on international families. Stan, a real pleasure to have you.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you come to Israel a lot, which is great, and I know that you deal a lot with the U.S. tax obligations of U.S. citizens and green card holders who live in Israel. So what are some of the big issues that they're confronting now?
Well, one of the issues, Doug, that I think a lot of people have come to realize or maybe didn't realize before is the extent to which U.S. citizens remain subject to U.S. tax, even though they're living in Israel or really anywhere outside the United States. That U.S. citizens are fully subject to U.S. income tax on their worldwide income and U.S. estate and gift taxes as well on their worldwide assets. And I think a lot of people maybe didn't fully realize the extent to which their tax and filing requirements followed them when they left the U.S. and came to live in Israel.
So what do you tell people? One of the things I commonly hear in my office, they say, you know, my day job is that I'm a financial advisor, so I deal with people in their personal finances, and they'll say, oh yeah, but Doug, that doesn't apply because of the Israeli-U.S. tax treaty.
Yeah, well, the fact is that the U.S. retains its right to tax its citizens sort of irrespective of what else might be in the treaty. So that the U.S. citizens do remain subject to tax. And as I say, there's a number of, even if they don't actually owe tax because they get a credit for the Israeli taxes which they pay, they still have filing requirements to report on their income and their assets and such as if they're here, and there can be some substantial penalties for not complying with all those requirements.
Okay, before we frighten people with the penalties, let's talk a little bit about one of the assets that also people frequently feel doesn't apply, which is their Israeli pensions. How does that fit into the picture?
Well, with Israeli pensions, a lot of times if they're not qualified as such in the United States, that they might be subject to tax on sort of a current ongoing basis. One of the difficult things with all investments that U.S. people have when they're outside the United States, or a lot of times those investments are not really oriented towards U.S. tax reporting. And that can make the compliance very difficult for U.S. taxpayers.
And sometimes they're actually considered what in America would be referred to as an offshore mutual fund?
Yes, exactly. And subject to tax as such. And sometimes, particularly if they have corporations as part of the structure under which they're organized, those corporations may be passive foreign investment companies, or what we call PFICs, that also have additional filing requirements incident to those.
Yeah, that's an issue that we've seen a lot. You know, people who made Aliyah, people who moved to Israel over the years, not now, I'm not seeing it currently, but certainly 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they got excited because there were these offshore mutual fund salesmen who said, hey, you can buy this mutual fund and there's no tax. And now they're finding that when they have to clean up their act, they end up in involuntary disclosure programs, if not worse.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're seeing a lot of people in situations like that, unfortunately, and trying to clean it up as best and most expeditiously as we possibly can for people. But the U.S. has gotten much more active in looking for people and who are outside the United States and making sure they're completing all their filing requirements. And there are additional filing requirements over the years. In addition to the FBAR requirement, which many people are familiar with, for U.S. people to disclose their foreign financial accounts, there's now forms necessary to disclose really all of your foreign assets which you hold. There's a Form 8938, which was put into place where people have to disclose that.
Is that including real estate?
No, not real estate that's owned directly doesn't have to be disclosed on that form, but if they own the real estate through an entity such as a company of some form, the company itself needs to be disclosed rather than the real estate itself. But if they own the real estate directly, that's not something that needs to be disclosed.
Okay, we are talking with Stan Barg, who practices law with Kozusko, Harris, and Duncan, specializing in tax law and really international taxation, which is so important to a lot of the listeners of the Goldstein on Gelt show. In fact, Stan, a lot of the things that you're talking about, we've been speaking about a lot over the past half year or so, because I came out with a book called The Expatriate's Guide to Handling Money and Taxes, and it focused on a number of the issues that you're bringing up. But when it gets more complicated, that's when people have to call in someone like you, I guess, to really clean it up.
I mean, the area does get very complicated, Doug. I mean, as I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of people who, I mean, we've been talking about U.S. citizens. There's sometimes situations where people don't even realize they're U.S. citizens, but they are U.S. citizens because of whatever their circumstances may have been. They may have been born in the United States, or whose parents were, and spend a sufficient time in the U.S. that their children are U.S. citizens as well. And we also see it for green card holders, people that have been and spent time in the United States with a green card and then left the U.S. without formally surrendering the green card. They may be regarded as subject to U.S. tax just because of their green card status.
That could be very painful. So what, in that event, what do you advise people who are considering terminating their green card status or, in fact, giving up their U.S. citizenship?
Well, it's something that needs to be looked at very carefully because of the fact that the U.S. has been so aggressive. An increasing number of people are looking at doing it. One figure I heard has said that since 2008, 6 times more people on an annual basis are deciding to give up their citizenship or green cards than they did then, in spite of the fact that the rules have gotten more strict. And that is for most people who either are citizens or have had their green cards for at least 8 years. If they surrender that status, they're then subject to an exit tax that's basically treated as if they sold their worldwide assets on the day before they terminated their U.S. status, and then have to pay an income tax based on that.
If someone, let's say, lives in the United States for 10, 20, 30 years as a grown-up and then moves to Israel and ultimately gives up his U.S. citizenship, does he then have to sacrifice his Social Security that he would eventually get, or is that a pension you get because you paid into the system?
It's basically a pension that you get because you paid into the system. What they do, what there is threatened to be is with respect to citizens who leave the U.S., there is a provision in the law that has not been generally enforced, referred to as the Reed Amendment, under which they can forbid you to come back into the United States if they make a determination that you gave up your citizenship for tax avoidance. To my knowledge, that's never been successfully prosecuted against anyone, although in the last couple of years there has been a bit of talk about it.
Stan, one of the things that you do is you're also the head of STEP USA. The STEP is the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. I'm also a member here in Israel. And as such, you're dealing with a lot of trust that people maybe set up in the United States for the benefit of someone in Israel. Have you seen any important changes that people should be aware of recently?
Well, I think that one of the advantages of a group like STEP, and Doug, I'm sure you've seen this in the STEP programs that you've participated in, is that you get to work with professionals all over the world, because what we're finding for our clients is that increasingly where the families have interests in different countries, that you need to be up to date and working with the professionals in those countries to get the right result for the family as a whole. That if I have a family where, for example, the parents live in the United States and their children live in Israel, I can look at the planning from a U.S. perspective, but I need to work with professionals in Israel to be sure that what we're doing for the family as a whole achieves the right goals from an Israeli perspective as well. And as the world's getting increasingly smaller with families being all over the place, that's really very important.
Yeah, I wish that your words would be heard by many, many more people. I would say a common area that I'm dealing with even more now is that the family in New York maybe has some hotshot law firm there, and they set up the trusts and the estate planning, and they don't even consider the fact that the grown-up child lives in Israel. And only after the parents die does it come to light that the planning was so bad from an Israeli standpoint, and had they originally planned for it, they could have set up as the parents had wanted, but they didn't. So I think that for any lawyers out there listening, or people who are considering setting up trusts for their children who live outside the United States, it's critical to get professional advice from the tax advisors who live in the foreign country.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And every country, it seems, around the world is changing their laws in this area. It seems almost from year to year. So you really need to be sure you're getting up-to-date advice in all of the relevant countries.
Okay, well, that's very good advice. We've been talking with Stan Barg, who's an international lawyer, and he travels to Israel a great deal, and he's familiar with a lot of the issues that cross-border families have, and he works with a lot of cross-border advisors. Stan, we're just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, could you just tell us how can people follow you or follow your work?
Doug, thanks very much. I am, as you say, based in New York with the firm Kosciuszko Harris Duncan. Our website is www.kozlaw.com, and I'd be very happy for people to get in touch if they have any questions, and be happy to help them.
Okay, Stan Barg, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Doug. Pleasure speaking with you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.